BYU's history with upstate New York is one of really, really good news. And the latest bit of good news could be a flip from Syracuse University that is an athlete with elite track speed that could be a major piece of BYU's defensive secondary.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer at the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 13-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider as your host here on the podcast. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances today and do it with our friends at Monarch Money. Go to monarchmoney.com. Use the promo code Locked On College and get 50% off your first year. All right, coming up on today's show, recruiting focused edition of the show, a little bit shorter on time as well. But the good news is we're going to talk about two major developments in the recruiting sphere for BYU on the football side of things in the past 24 hours, one of which could be a major flip from Syracuse University and Jaxson Gates. What does he offer to BYU and why are they so intent on flipping his commitment? We'll talk about that first, and then we'll talk about a new commitment to the BYU football program, that being Matthew Mason out of the Silver State. Speaking of Nevada, what does he offer to Jay Hill as a safety? Well, we'll dig into that a little bit later on. All right, so we're out of the chute here. Let's talk about Jaxson Gates. I'm going to throw this up here as we're talking, let you guys see a little bit of what you can expect from this young man if and when he decides to play for BYU. We'll play his highlights, but the one thing to know about Jaxson Gates is this is a young man who has got elite track speed. He took up track and field this past year. He plays high school football down in Laverne, California. And you're probably wondering, how in the world is he committed to Syracuse University? But that's how recruiting goes in this day and age. But what he has shown on film as you're watching this, if you're watching this on YouTube, is he's got great size. It's 6'1", 170 pounds. But more importantly than that, he's got elite track speed. Personal record, 10.39 second 100-meter dash. We're talking that's legit sprinter type speed, and that's the type of speed that could end up making him an NFL prospect in time during his college career. Beyond the fact that he's got elite speed, this is a young man who plays a very physical brand of football as a cornerback, but at the same time is very good in coverage, tracks the ball well, makes sure he stays with the guys he's covering out on an island as a cornerback, which is obviously a major piece that you need to succeed at the Power 4 level that BYU is evaluating him here for. But this is a young man who's also, I think, intent on looking at all options. He has recently taken visits to the University of Utah. He's visited Michigan State in recent weeks. And last week, he visited Syracuse, the program he committed to last November. I think it was like late November last year. He's been committed there for well over 6 months at this point. He made a visit last week, and there was some question if he might affirm his commitment to the Orange during that visit, and ultimately did not do so, and announced last night that he will officially take a visit to BYU this weekend, adding another piece to an already elite recruiting weekend for BYU, where they could see maybe 20 guys visiting BYU, looking at what the Cougars have to offer on official visits. And the hope is the Cougars can make major hay out of this recruiting weekend and bring in some major pieces to their football program. The highlights here show him he's got the track speed to chase down guys, even if he's out of position, and guys that he's not covering. I love what Jaxson Gates shows on film here, because it's absolutely something that BYU and I think other programs covet, and that's that type of speed to go out there and really attack opposing wide receivers, but at the same time, make sure they don't have success. Cornerbacks play on an island. That's just part of life when you play cornerback at the Power 4 level. You are required to be able to succeed in man coverage, and this is a young man who shows that. He also, watching this film, shows some special teams highlights, the ability to get around the edge, block kicks and the like. So it's the thing about this is this type of speed, it's hard to find. Now, if you're wondering, okay, in terms of what his track ranking, what I'm trying to say is what his overall rating is as a player, it's a high 3-star. Now, some of you get mad when I talk about high 3 stars and low 4 stars and that type of stuff, but he got an 88 rating from our friends at 24/7 Sports. You get to an 89, you're knocking on the door of being a 4-star prospect. That is why Utah, Michigan State, BYU, among others, are trying to flip Jaxson Gates from Syracuse. I think BYU has a pitch of, hey, you're closer to home when you come and play in Provo, Utah. A guy like Jernaro Gilford, who obviously is recruiting him out of Southern California. Jernaro can speak directly to being a guy who came from Southern California, succeeded at a high level at BYU as a non-member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has since returned to the university that he absolutely loves coaching for. And he can sell, I think, many guys on what BYU can do for them. And that's what I love about why BYU is chasing this young man, is so intent on flipping him from Syracuse. Now, obviously, Syracuse will be doing their darndest to stay in contact, I'm sure, with Jaxson Gates to hopefully hold on to that commitment. But looking at this highlight reel, it's readily apparent that BYU is intent on upgrading their secondary and doing so with type of guys that have the adequate size, speed, and length combo that they look for. We talked earlier this week about Antonio Johnson out of Texas, playing down there in the Fort Worth area. 6'4", 180, 190 pound athlete, could play either corner or safety. BYU wants tall, long athletes in their secondary, and that's exactly what they'd be getting here with a Jaxson Gates, and I think he would add to a very impressive roster of cornerbacks for BYU. But at the same time, the other pitch I think BYU makes here to Jaxson Gates is there is a major opportunity coming as soon as next year, if you were to enroll, that you could be a starting cornerback or at least see major playing time as a freshman for the BYU football program. You're going to see this year guys like Evan Johnson age out of the program. If I recall, Evan might be a senior, this might be a junior, but in time, there's going to be a turnover in that cornerback room. I know Maury Bamba, he is indeed done after this season because he got the 1 year back. So there is opportunities there for a guy like Jaxson Gates to be thinking, hey, I can play a little closer to home. An hour and a half flight to Southern California is better than 5+ hours potentially travel time to get to upstate New York and into Syracuse. And let's be honest, the winters in Utah, far more mild than upstate New York, where they get some pretty intense blizzard-like conditions. But that's all beside the point. I get why BYU sees Jaxson Gates and they see, okay, this kid's got major skills that could be a major piece to our puzzle in terms of being an elite defense going forward in the Big 12 conference. And I think Jay Hill has shown that cornerbacks that come and play at BYU in his defense, they shine. Look at Eddie Heckard. Look this past year at guys like, who am I trying to think of? I'm thinking of Jacob Robinson. They shine in this defense. And a guy like Jaxson Gates, he's got the size that Eddie Heckard and Jacob Robinson would love to have. And that's one thing I think BYU can pitch him on to try and convince him to flip his commitment from Syracuse to BYU. And yet another guy that BYU gets the final visit in terms of before he makes his ultimate decision of where he's going to play. BYU gets the final word and has the most recent memories on the official visit circuit for a guy like Jaxson Gates. And I think this is a major, major target for BYU to monitor going into this coming weekend. All right, let's talk coming up next about an actual commit to the BYU football program that came yesterday. That is a guy by the name of Matthew Mason. Now, comes from Faith Lutheran High School down there in Southern Nevada. BYU's had a pretty good track record at mining talent out of the Silver State, and it continues here with Matthew Mason. What to make of him? We'll get into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Now, Monarch Money is here for you guys to help you get out of a pinch. I think all of us have checked our bank account and said, hey, where'd all that money go? Well, between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, and a bevy of other outlets, it's easy to lose track of that money. That's where Monarch Money comes in as your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. The best part is it'll teach you exactly what to look for in making sure that your finances are in order. It's a complete financial command center, tracking all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. You stop just managing your money and start building actual wealth. And the best part is you can manage your money with your significant other and see all the accounts, whether they're separate or shared accounts, and make sure you're on the same page all the way along without all the stress that can come when it comes to finances. So take control of your finances and do it with our friends over at Monarch Money. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, promo code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, please continue to subscribe, rate, and review, and share this with your family and friends. And by the way, if you'd like to advertise with the show, we'd love nothing more than to work with you guys as well. Email us, lockedonbyu@gmail.com. We'll get you in contact with our Locked On sales team and get you on the path to advertising success with Locked On, the network, and obviously this here podcast. All right. Matthew Mason announced his commitment to BYU, and it felt like for a little while there, this was almost inevitable that Matthew Mason would end up lining up with BYU. And I'm going to share his highlights as well, so you guys can see this as we talk. But the one thing about Matthew Mason that I see from my side of things is I see a kid who has got the type of skills to be a future free safety for this BYU defense. Now, here's the thing about playing free safety for the BYU football program is you have to be a guy who cleans up everything else for everything in front of you when it comes to your other teammates. A linebacker misses a tackle. A guy, a cornerback falls out of his coverage assignment and the like. You have to be willing to clean that up. But the other thing I see from Matthew Mason is he's an ultra physical player and plays some outside linebacker for his high school down there in Southern Nevada. And you see it on the highlight reel if you're watching this on YouTube, is this is a kid who absolutely brings it. Speaking of just hammering dudes, and you're going to see in time on this highlight reel is this is a kid who's also got track speed to be able to chase down players, which is a major reason why I could see him as a potential successor in time to a guy like Tanner Wall. There's a lot of people out there who want to discount what Tanner Wall means to this BYU defense, but I would encourage you guys to go back and watch what Tanner Wall meant to BYU's defense last year, cleaning up some of the mistakes his teammates made. And you are literally, when you're the free safety for the BYU defense, literally the last line of defense for the Cougars, and that's what Jay Hill looks for in guys that he tries to bring into this football program. We talked about Antonio Johnson earlier this week. Antonio Johnson could also be the type of guy who plays free safety in time for BYU, but Matthew Mason, you can already see it on his highlight reel. He's got the speed to chase down guys from behind, has the ability to come up and run support and absolutely hammer dudes, and also has the ball skills in the air to make plays. He's the complete package. And similar to what we just talked about earlier on with Jaxson Gates, Matthew Mason's a high-level 3-star prospect in his own right, rated 87, so he's a shade under what you look at in terms of what Jaxson Gates, who might be knocking on the door at 4-star status at some point. Well, Matthew Mason's not far off from that. And that's the thing about this is we talk often about BYU and 3-star prospects. There's a lot of people who get upset. BYU needs to be recruiting at a higher level. I agree they do. But BYU's history has been, they have been usually recruiting with guys who are rated 83, 82, 84 in the 3-star ranks versus the 85s and above. And that's really BYU's floor right now in terms of their commits into this football program is that they are 85 or above rated. And that shows that the floor for BYU in recruiting has absolutely gone up. And that means you are getting better athletes and guys who are more productive at the high school level and thereby should be more productive members of the BYU football program. That's exactly what I think of Matthew Mason here because he shows every skill I feel like that a guy like Jay Hill wants from his defensive backs. It doesn't hurt that much like Antonio Johnson and the other safeties BYU's committed in recent years, he stands 6'3". He's already 190, maybe 200 pounds. He's got everything you want in terms of size, speed, and length. And that there's an archetype that BYU's chasing for the defensive secondary and what Jay Hill's looking for at safety. And Matthew Mason seems to check every box here. And as I said earlier this week when I talked about Antonio Johnson, if a guy like Jay Hill, who is a proven talent evaluator and also a proven talent developer, sees a guy that he likes and decides to recruit that guy, who am I to disagree with a guy like Jay Hill? His track record suggests that he knows what he is doing. He knows what he's looking for. And more often than not, the guys he brings in to the programs he's coached at, Utah, Weber State, now BYU, they have some pretty darn good success. And I love the fact that he is finding guys everywhere. And Faith Lutheran is a program that's had some pretty good success in Southern Nevada. And I think that the Las Vegas area needs to continue to be a place that BYU gets talent out of at least annually, at least 1 or 2 guys, because it's a growing area in terms of population. The Las Vegas area continues to add people down there in the desert, and the talent, it's showing itself to be very capable. Now, I know that Bishop Gorman is like the gold standard in terms of recruiting guys out of Southern California, but there are other programs like Faith Lutheran that you can find some nice athletes at. And I think that's what BYU's looking at here when they look at a guy like Matthew Mason and saying, okay, yeah, this kid's got it. And let's bring him in and see what he's capable of in this BYU defense. So the versatility, the size, the speed, the length, everything screams this is a young man who is poised for success at BYU. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he's capable of at BYU in time. And that'll ultimately will take time, because here's the thing. Very few guys are capable of coming in to BYU and contributing right away as a true freshman. Now, this past year, we saw opportunities for guys like Tommy Prasis and Falatau Satuala to see reps. I'll also look at Trey Alexander and Jonathan Kambea. If you're good enough, BYU will give you that opportunity to get on the field early on in your career. And with a guy like Tanner Wall set to exit the program after this upcoming season, Matthew Mason probably looks at that and says, hey, I can come in and hopefully make him imprint right away and find some rotation time as a true freshman. He'll have to prove himself, and he'll obviously have to go out there and prove capable, because Jay Hill, as I mentioned, he's got a keen eye for talent. There's no doubt about that, but he's very, very demanding of the guys he puts on the field at the same time. If he puts you on the field, he expects you to produce. And that's, I talk about Tanner Wall often, and I've talked about him a lot here, but I look at what Tanner Wall has meant to the BYU football program as a walk-on who at one point was a wide receiver, then made the move to safety, and has emerged now as a true team leader, a team captain. That's the type of guy that Jay Hill loves, but obviously he is trying to find that in every guy he brings into this BYU football program. The heart of the lion that a guy like Tanner Wall has, it's hard to replace that. But if you look at the film for a guy like Matthew Mason, he plays with a lot of heart. And I know that can come off as like almost saying that he doesn't have the skills necessary. No, he's got the skills. And that's the thing, is BYU's no longer looking at maybe one or two traits that they may see, okay, that's a guy we can take and we can develop in time. No, they're looking for the complete package. And that's, once again, when Jay Hill sees a guy that he likes, I am never going to say, hey, Jay Hill's up in the night and recruiting this guy, because Jay Hill's track record suggests that he knows a heck of a lot more about defensive secondaries, safeties, and just overall defense at the collegiate football level than I will ever hope to know. And his track record suggests that guys like Matthew Mason, given adequate time, training with the strength and conditioning staff and the sports science people at BYU, that he could emerge on the other side as maybe a 6'3", 205-pound battering ram who's got that speed to play as a free safety. And much like Tanner Wall, clean up the messes in front of him in that single high safety look that BYU favors under Jay Hill. I like this pickup. I like the way that BYU is going about restocking the secondary. I know that there's going to come a transition point in the next year or two where that secondary almost is completely turned over from what it was. But the thing is, the recruits that BYU has added in recent days, Antonio Johnson earlier this week, Matthew Mason here. We talked earlier today about a potential flip of Jaxson Gates. The Cougars are very much, I'm not trying to come off as like over the top about this, but they know what they're looking for, and they have targeted it, and they expect that these guys, they're going to come in and be kind of the next generation of star defensive players for BYU. And I think Matthew Mason, very capable of being just that for the BYU football program. So congratulations to him and his family on accepting that scholarship offer from BYU, committing to the Cougars. And here's the better days ahead for Matthew Mason and the BYU defense as he looks to make an imprint early on in his BYU career. All right, that is going to do it for today's edition of the podcast. I'm going to step aside here. Now, I did plan to take today off from the podcast, but when things change with the news cycle as they did, I decided to flip it a little bit. I am planning on taking tomorrow off. Now, I do have some dental work scheduled, speaking of today, Wednesday, and that obviously would play a role in it. But hey, news breaks. I will be sure to muster up the courage, and if I'm slurring my speech, we'll try and find a way through it to make sure you guys have the news you have. But understand if tomorrow we take a day off and get back after it Friday, as really a major weekend on the recruiting front begins. Ryder Lyons in town. All right, talk about Jaxson Gates and dozens of others potentially in terms of 3, 4, and 5-star talents visiting BYU on a major, maybe those pivotal recruiting weekend in recent memory for BYU football. And we'll get after it on a Friday edition of the show if all goes well. But as always, thank you for your support of the podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen of the day. And once again, as always, thank you for being an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.